Okay, so once again, good morning, guys. I hope you can hear me and see the screen. Yes. Okay. So the last session we briefly touched upon the multiprocessors and multi-computing, right? So we were talking about big scale processor, right? Like very large scale supercomputers. So we will continue with that this lecture. So we saw different shared memory multiprocessors, the UMA model, uniform memory access, the non-uniform memory access, cache only memory access, and cache coherent non-uniform memory access. So we just briefly touched upon these. And then we also saw about distributed multi-computers where you have standalone machines, which is called as NORMA, no remote memory access machines, and which can be connected over the LAN or InfiniBand or some technology, and that can also be made as a cluster. So these are distributed computers, multi-computers. We have some examples of these include the IBM 9000, BBN TC 200, and so on. And for multi-computers, we have Intel Paragon, which we saw earlier. And we also saw about how to parallelize an algorithm. So you have a program, and that program can be run on a suitable single processor machine. But then, how do we parallelize it? Let's say we have like hundreds of processors. Then can we parallelize this and do the same program more efficiently? And we saw this example, and we also showed that we can achieve uh, better timing, right? So we saw that we were able to perform 214 times better than a single process system, right? And we also briefly saw what is efficiency. So efficiency is the measured speed up. uh, and make this go. So efficiency is nothing but the measured speed up by theoretical maximum speed up. Okay, so which means that if you have 100 processors in your multi-computer, it doesn't mean that you will get 100x speed up. Okay, you will get only probably 80x speed up. So today we will see more into these multiprocessors and multi-computers. So first one, in multiprocessor system, you have the UMA model, right? So that's the first thing that we saw. UMA stands for Uniform Memory Access. Okay, so the name itself suggests that all the processors have uniform or equal opportunity to access the memory. Okay, so as you can see, you have these processing elements here. So processors and processing elements, we will use it interchangeably. Okay, so here you have multiple processors. Again, I'm to give you context, we are not talking about three or four here. The number is very large, hundreds of processors. Okay, so we will have hundreds of these processors that are connected to a system interconnect. Now, don't think of these as standalone systems. Okay, we are not again talking about 100 different desktops or 100 different workstations. We are not talking about them. So these are 100 processors or processor boards, right? So these boards are connected to a network on chip. So the system interconnect, it's not like your LAN cable. So this is actually embedded onto your motherboard itself, right? Or it could be like a separate board by itself, a network board. Okay, so it's called as network on chip. So there are different ways to do this. It can be a bus, or it can be a crossbar, or it can be a multi-stage network. Bus, I think you would have heard of bus before. Bus is nothing but it's a channel for your processors to communicate. The only thing is there is always this bus arbitration, because there is only one bus. Like for example, you have your data bus or address bus, correct? So so bus is something like this. So you have a bus here, and you have device A, and then you have device B, and okay, so there are a lot of devices attached. Let us say this is a memory, right? Let's say this processor wants to access this memory. Now, at the same time, this processor also wants to access this memory, but then there has to be some arbitration. Somebody is the bus master, and that bus master is going to say who out of these two will get access. So if somebody gets access, no others have to wait. At any point of time, only one of them can access. Okay, so this was actually a problem. So they introduced a better solution. So we had these crossbars. Crossbars look something similar to your FFT butterflies, right? If you have heard of them. uh, let's just take a very simple one. So, so it's going to look like this. So this is a very simple crossbar. Okay, so here your device 1, device 2. Okay, and this can be device 1, device 2 again, or it can be device 3, device 4. It depends on the architecture. So what we're trying to say is, so now if I want to access this part of the memory, I can access this, while D2, right, cannot access this memory, but if it wants to access this part, it can access. Okay, so this can be established. So there is a little bit less contention. Okay, so on the other way also is possible. Like if D1 wants to access this, it can, and D2 cannot access this at that time, so it can access this memory. Okay, so it actually reduces the contention. Okay, so now they have extended, so that's a crossbar. Now an extension of that is the multi-stage multi-stage network. Multi-stage network is nothing but multiple stages of your crossbars. Okay, so that is even more efficient than crossbar. So it can be any of these here. So your processors can access your memory, and also your IO. Okay, so IO goes without saying, so you also assume that IO is also included. So all these are common or commonly shared between these processors. Okay, so as opposed to UMA, you have NUMA. NUMA is nothing but non-uniform memory access. Again, as the name suggests, so each processor will not have equal share of the memory. Okay, why is that? It's because, so these processors are going to have local memory. So P1 is going to have a local memory LM1, and P2 is going to have LM2. Okay, so these are local to this processor. Now, the advantage is that I don't have to wait for any contention resolution if I have my own local memory. Okay, most of the times, most of your programs will work on local memory, and maybe due to, for some synchronization or some shared memory access, you will use shared memory. Other than that, you will mostly stick to local memory, right? So because of that, NUMA was introduced. Uh, but the problem is that if there are some shared variables, then you may have to wait for uh, the other person's local memory. Okay, so so again, you have your local memory, and then these are connected through your interconnection. The only difference is previously the memory was accessible through the interconnection network, right? But here it is not the case. Your local memory is accessible to you right away, but your the non-local memory can be accessible only through the interconnection network. Okay, so it has to access the interconnection network, and through this it has to access this memory. Okay, so this is first a model of your NUMA. It's also called as shared local memories, or N butterfly. No, there's one more variant of NUMA, where you have a hierarchical model. Okay, so in this hierarchical model, it's again, it looks uh, uh, very similar to your shared memory model, right? If you look at one particular cluster, if you just take this one cluster, this is nothing but your shared memory model. Okay, you have your processors, you have your memory, and you have your interconnection network. Okay, so this is a, each individual cluster will have a local shared memory model, or local UMA. Okay, this is locally a UMA model. Okay, but each of these clusters will go through another global interconnection network to access the global memory. Okay, so there is a global shared memory, and these are accessible only through the network. Okay, the advantage again here is, so there are some local memories here, so and then a set of processors can access these memory without any contention. It's you can think of this as like a mixture of the two, right? Like more like a hybrid model thing, but it still falls under NUMA, because there are processors which I mean, where there is non-uniform memory access, right? So this if this particular processor needs to access this memory, then it has to go through this interconnection network. Okay, so there is still this difference between your local access and global access. So this definitely falls under your NUMA model. Okay, any questions on this, guys? Any questions, guys? Is this easy to grasp? Are you able to follow? Okay. And next we have COMA. COMA is cache only memory architecture. So here again, as the name suggests, there is no memory, but there is only cache. Okay, so you have a directory, and you have your local cache and a processor, and you need a directory to know what are the entries that are present in the cache, right? And these uh, processor cache cluster, or you mean you can call it as like a local cache processor module, so that will connect through the interconnection network. Okay, so there is no memory here, but you only have cache. So far what we have seen are all multi-processors. Okay, like I said, multi-processors are uh, different processor chips that go on the same board, or you have like blades of them connected through your network on chip. A network on chip is also another board. Okay, so these are not individual computers, so they are very they are still you will have what to say, the multiprocessors are still considered as one computer. Okay, however, if you take multi computers are multiple individual computers. Okay, so you have a standalone machine, your MP model, right? P is your processor and M is your memory. So if you have your memory and processor forming like one computer, and this can also be called as your norma, right? This no network connection here, so it's a standalone system. Now, in order to make a cluster out of this, what you will do is you will connect it to your, very simply said, it can be connected to a LAN, but LAN is very slow. So there are better technologies like InfiniBand and others. Okay, and the way you connect also matters. Now there's a network topology that you have to follow. Okay, mesh is nothing but all to all connection, and ring is nothing but you connect it through a ring. Okay, so and torus is actually very interesting. Okay, so torus looks like a donut. Okay, so it's something like this. So a mesh is actually all to all. Okay, so if you have four nodes, this is your mesh. And ring, of course, you know. So if you have four things, so this is your ring. So this is mesh. This is a ring, and this is your torus. A torus looks like this, but there's a wraparound. Okay, so there's a wraparound like this, there's a wraparound like this, and there's a wraparound like this. So if you think about it, it actually looks like a donut or vada, whatever you can relate, right? So it'll be like this. And now, an interesting thing about torus is you can actually make it multi-dimensional. Okay, so you have some kind of a ring, right? So some kind of a vada or like this. But now what you can do is you can have one more vada stacked. Okay, you can have one more vada, and then you can make a garland out of it, like what they do to Hanuman, right? So they make a garland out of the vada. So it actually, this itself forms a torus. Okay, so it's like a it's the next dimension donut you have, and you can make again a garland out of that. Okay, so it's actually it fits, it's highly scalable, and it has a very small diameter, meaning that the hops, number of hops to reach the most distant node, right? So it's very small. Okay, so that's a nice thing about torus. Now, hypercube is also another important topology. Hypercube is a cube within a cube within a cube within a cube, so it goes like that. Okay, so that's also a very interesting model. So if you have a cube, so if this is a cube, then actually you will have one more cube on top of this. Okay, a cube inside a cube, and you connect the corresponding nodes. Okay, so this will be connected to this, this will be connected to this will be connected to this will be connected to this, and so on. Okay, so that will be connected to the other point there. Okay, so this is a cube within a cube, so this is also highly scalable. Okay, so these are the different topologies that are available, and you have to keep in mind that these are individual computers. Okay, so now you can actually make a cluster out of computers. For example, actually we were planning to do one small project in our college. So we have our old systems dumped or like made into a lab uh, for your TYL placements and things like that, right? But it's not very much used. So we have around like 150 old systems. Not sure if you have heard of this term Beowulf clusters. So, but probably we were trying to do that, but unfortunately, because of all this COVID and things like that, now it didn't move at all. Actually, it's still in the planning phase, but it can be done. Okay, so if you have 150 systems, even if it's an old system, you can actually make a cluster out of it, and then you can connect it as one of these topologies, and that can be made as a server, or it can be made as a small cluster, right? So that's actually a very nice way to reuse your old systems. Any questions on this, guys? Hello, guys. Guys are awake? No doubt. I leave this as reading exercise. So this is the taxonomy of MIMD that I think a few slides back we had one bullet point, right? Taxonomy of MIMD computers. I leave it for you guys to go through this. The next we will go to multi-vector and SIMD processors. Okay. So multi-vector. So we briefly saw what is a vector machine, right? So SIMD and vector machines are closely related. Okay, so vector machines make use of, so in the fact that many of the application, especially DSP applications, work on arrays, right? Arrays and matrices. even your graphics processors work on matrices. Okay, so whenever you have matrices or you have vectors to work on, or a stream of data that has to be processed in a similar fashion, then with just one instruction you can do the processing for multiple data, right? So that's the idea. So vector processors, I mean class. So vector processors, so there are different variants. So vector supercomputers are there, and then attached processors. Okay, and then vector, you have vector model and architecture. Based on that, you have register to register or memory to memory architecture. Okay, so a vector supercomputer is actually a supercomputer made of all vector processors, and attached processors are nothing but you have vector processor attached to a host. Okay, so there is a uni or SISD based machine, so it's not a parallel machine. So that machine will actually connect to your vector processor, so it's more like a co-processor. Okay, and based on the model, so you have register to register architecture, where you actually work on your vector processor works on a register level, and you have vector registers. So previously we were only, I think, in maybe in your computer organization course or something, you'd have heard of so many general purpose registers, right? And these are all like individual registers, like 32-bit register or 16-bit register, right? Now a register itself in a vector processor will be a vector quantity, which means that it will be like 32 32-bit registers, or 16 32-bit registers, and things like that. So the only constraint is that the vector length is actually fixed. So once you, because it's a hardware, right, number of registers and number of vector elements, you have to fix it, you have to hardwire it and fab it, correct? You cannot scale it, you cannot later say, oh, I don't want 16, I want 32. You cannot change that. Okay, so these are fixed. So if you want to add some flexibility to it, you move to memory architecture, where you don't deal with registers, but in memory you can always map. Okay, you can consider your memory to be the first 32 elements as the vector, or later if you want to scale, you can make the first 64 bit, I mean 64 elements as your vector. So that's the flexibility that you have. So examples of vector processors are Cray. So Cray was one of the most popular vector machines. Even today, Cray is still popular. Okay, and then you have your convex series. So this is what I was talking about, right? So a vector processor being attached. So what happens here is you have a scalar processor. So this is a scalar processor or an SISD processor. Single instruction, single data. Okay, so in this, your scalar processor has a control unit, and the control unit, one of the main jobs of control unit is to decode. Okay, so when it decodes the instruction, it will find out whether it falls under a scalar instruction or a vector instruction. If it's a scalar instruction, it will give it to your scalar processor. If it's a vector instruction, it is going to send the vector instruction to a vector control unit, and the vector control unit is in the vector processor. So vector processor is attached to, it's more like a co-processor, okay, to your scalar unit. And here it will do as if it has got the instruction, and it will process it, and it will store the results in the vector registers. Okay, and also note that there is a host computer. So actually, it's important that you know these terminologies. So whenever you talk about supercomputers, your supercomputers don't just work as standalone systems. Okay, it just doesn't work that way. It's so huge. You need somebody to manage these stuff. Okay, so typically how things happen is, so you'll have your supercomputer here. So this is your big box of supercomputer with a lot of computing power, but it will be attached to one host. Okay, and this host is a workstation or a high-end system that will have your monitor, keyboard, and all these things. Okay, so now if you want to run any job, the host will decide where these jobs are to be mapped. So let us say you're going to run a matrix multiplication. So this host is going to schedule the job to these set of processors. Okay, and it's going to say, okay, you do matrix multiplication. And if somebody wants to do some gene mutation simulation or something, it's going to allot it to this set of processors. Okay, so the host is what is going to take care of all these allocation, provisioning, and scheduling, and all these things. Okay, so host, you can think of host as more like the role of operating system, right? So it pretty much does the same thing to a supercomputer. Any questions, guys? Next, we have SIMD supercomputers. So previously we saw the vector systems attached to the scalar process, right? But it is also possible to have SIMD based supercomputers. They have a representation for them. So it goes as S equals NCIMR. So it's a tuple of five different attributes. N is number of PEs. PEs is the processing elements or processors in the machine, and C is the set of instructions executed in CU. Okay, CU is the control unit, and I is the set of instructions broadcast by CU to all PEs. Okay, so CU can decide where who does what. Okay, so I'll explain this in a minute. And M is the masking schemes. So masking means, let us say you have like 256 processors, right? If you have 256 processors, I can, your CU can say, give a mask saying 10011, something like this. And if this particular P is masked, then nobody, I mean, it's not going to send an instruction to this. It'll consider this as not present. Okay, so these will not be available. So it will only give the instructions to these processing elements. Okay, so masking helps in if you remember, I spoke about uh, allotting workload to only certain processors, right? Like something like that. So you can mask these PEs from executing these instructions. And next you have your R, your set of data routing functions. So this is also very important. So you need to know how the data should be routed. So for example, I have the data and somebody else is requesting the data. Now there has to be a route, right? So previously we saw in the butterfly cluster that if it's a share, if it's a local memory, I will access it directly. Otherwise, I'll have to access it through your interconnection network, right? So that routing has to be clearly specified. So this is like a specification for your supercomputer. Any questions, guys? So these are the different examples of your SIMD supercomputers. More important thing that you need to note is that your SIMD computers will have only one decoding or one control unit. Okay. Can somebody say why? Let's check. Vidur, are you there? Can you hear me? Vidur? Yeah. Can you tell me, explain about this note here? SIMD implies only one decode or CU, while MIMD has multiple decode. Why is that? Hello, Vidur. Okay. Who can answer? Can you point to somebody who can answer? Varun, are you here? Hey, yeah, Varun. Can you please help Vidur? Okay. Then why are you guys saying I understood, no doubts? Should have asked me, no? I mean, the answer is in the note itself. Can somebody try? Who else can answer? Just give it a shot, right? I mean, you can be wrong. It's okay. Priya. Ah, okay. Shruti Singh. Okay. Only single instruction is processed in SIMD. Good. Okay. Yeah, that's right. Priya, are you there? Priya S. Let's quickly check. Okay. Shiva Prasad. Yeah. Can you explain why that's the case? Why SIMD implies only one decode or CU? Right. Yeah. Correct. Very good. Thank you. So yeah, that's it, right? So it's a single instruction, multiple data. So there is only one instruction stream. So it's sufficient to have only one decoder or one control unit. Okay. So anytime you come across a SIMD machine, there will be like only one decoder. Okay. So that's about it. All right. So now another review question. A multiprocessor operating system should perform. Who can answer this? Shiva Prasad. Please ask one of your friend to answer this. You nominate somebody. Hey, nominate somebody who's really, I mean, who's very, what to say, who has this low profile, right? Who don't want to speak up. What? I mean, is that one name or many names? what's the what's the name? Srikantam. Okay, Srikantam. Okay. Yeah, yeah. Seriously, right? Multiple choice question. If yeah, you don't even have to bother about C, right? If A and B are correct, then it has to be all of the above. Correct. It's right. So thanks, Srikanta. So multiprocessing operating system, right? Multiprocessor operating system, like we saw, right? So this will run on the host. Okay. So it has to split the task into concurrent subtasks. It has to optimize the system performance, and it has to handle the structural or architectural change. So basically, it's all of the above. It has to do all these things. So there's a lot more emphasis or importance to your multiprocessor operating system. Okay. So this is a typical SIMD supercomputer. Okay, so like I said, there is one control unit, and there's only one stream of instruction, and this control unit is supposed to split the instruction and then give it to the other processing elements. Okay, uh, so something else I wanted to mention here. Mhm. Okay, so if I recall, I'll say. Okay, so that's about your SIMD supercomputer. So here's an example. So again, I'm giving this as a reading exercise. Probably we'll go through this in the next class, or probably you can solve this as your workbook assignment. Uh, so this is the partial specification of the 5 triple mass par MP1 computer. Okay. Uh, so basically, these five bullets are the five tuple elements, right? We saw earlier. So this NCIMR. So that's what it is. So So you have n is equal to 1024 to 16384, and it just goes on. So you can actually take a look at it. Okay. So probably what we will do in your workbook is we will ask you to pick a supercomputer of your choice, a particular SIMD supercomputer, and you can actually come up with the specification of that. So that'll be a fun exercise to you. Okay. Any questions so far? Okay. Next, we will see PRAM and VLSI modules. This is very, very important. Okay, so probably we'll just touch upon the introduction to this PRAM and VLSI. We will actually continue this in the next class, but we'll just see a quick introduction to that. Okay, so what is a PRAM? PRAM stands for Parallel Random Access Machines. Okay, as opposed to your RAM, a random access machine. So random access machines are again your a single processor computer, and it has access to your memory. It's a random access memory you have, right? So you have access to that. But parallel random access machine adds one more thing to it. So it has parallel processing capability, which means you have multiple processors. Okay, so as you can see from this diagram, right? So you have multiple processors and there can be a shared memory. So this memory model can be different. So it can actually be any memory model, but PRAM specifies it's more like a hypothetical model of a parallel machine. Okay, so on paper, how things are going to work. So that was developed by Fortune and Wiley in 1978. So the main objective is to model an idealized computer. Okay, and uh, 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 they don't take any overhead or any synchronization issue or anything else into as a factor. Okay, it's purely a theoretical model of a computer, of a parallel computer. Okay, so the advantage of this is you can actually work on an algorithm and try to parallelize it or customize it to some particular architecture. Okay, so you may face a lot of issues during the actual deployment. I mean, first of all, whether that parallel machine is realizable or not itself is a question, but it gives you an idea, like how we saw earlier, right? So we actually had a simple addition of two vectors and accumulation of the result. So we tried to parallelize it. So we assumed something, right? So let us have 258 processor, I mean 256 processors, and then how we are going to allocate the computation. So it's something like that. So we are going to model it like that. Okay, so this is very important. It's very helpful if you want to model your problems. Okay, so before going into that, we also need to understand the time and space complexities. Okay. Okay. So before we go on to that, so there's one more point here, right? N processor PRAM has globally addressable memory. So you assume that this PRAMs have the addressing capability is global, meaning you don't have like a local global concept. Okay. You assume that all the processors will have access to this memory. Okay, while the way in which it is going to get accessed is different, and it can be centralized memory, it can be distributed, however it is everything is accessible to the processor. Okay, so that's what your PRAM is about. Yeah, and like I said, if before going into the uh, other details, so we should there are some prerequisites for us to understand this PRAM. Time complexity, space complexity, serial versus parallel complexity, and deterministic versus non-deterministic algorithms. Right. So these are different things. All these things we've seen in algorithms class. So we will just have a refresher here in this class on this. Okay. Okay. Big O. Have you heard of this before? Yeah. So what does it say? Correct. Time complexity analysis. Right. And what does big O particularly say? What does it do? Just don't go through the definition you can answer in English, not in algorithms. Right. Correct. The worst case complexity, right? So your big O tells the worst case complexity, or it gives you the upper bound. Your algorithm cannot go much worse than this. It's something like that, right? So it's something like if you want to find a name in a dictionary or a directory, right? If you want to find a name or a number in a directory, what's the worst case time you will take, considering that you take let's say 1 minute to process one page. Let's say you have 1,000 pages in that. What's the worst case time that will take? 1,000 minutes, correct? If you take 1 minute to parse one page, any name if I give, it doesn't matter what name. It can be a name that starts with A, it can be a name that starts with V or Y or Z, right? Doesn't matter what the name is. My worst case time will not be more than 1,000 minutes. Okay, so that's what your big O says. This is for any algorithm. It can be much faster. If the name starts with A, then you will do it in 1 minute. Okay, 1 minute or few minutes. So that's the idea. Okay, so it gives you like an idea how much worse or what should I be prepared for, correct? And the definition in algorithms term, it goes like this. If there exists positive constants c1, c2 and s naught, such that we are talking about big O of f of s. Okay, so then you should find one constant, multiply it with f of s, c1 times f of s, that should be lesser than g of s. Okay, so g of s is another function. So g of s is the actual polynomial we are talking about. Okay, and again it should be lesser than another constant times f of s. I mean it's very confusing. Uh, okay, I'll explain this in a bit. But anyway, before going, so I just want to point out that this definition is according to your textbook. Okay, so this definition is wrong, and it is in your textbook. Now, what I want you to do is point me what is wrong in this. Want me to pick a name? Who's good in algorithms again? Usha? Srilekha? Yeah. What is wrong in this? Okay. You guys remember algorithms? See, I'll tell you. Even though we are teaching, I mean, I'm teaching computer architecture, right? Algorithms is it's like the breadth of a computer engineer. Okay, so your algorithms and data structures are like the systole and diastole of a human. Okay, it's like it goes hand in hand. It's what it forms the heart. Okay, so and especially now you guys are facing placements, and these things should be in your fingertip. Okay, even in your sleeps, if somebody asks you what's the worst case complexity of quicksort, then you have to answer what's the worst case complexity of quicksort. Hey, that's okay, Usha. My God, I'm being very cruel, I think. Anyway, so I'll tell you, this is not the definition of big O. This is the definition of theta. Okay, big theta. There's no big theta, small theta. It's always theta. Okay, so this is the definition of theta notation. Okay, but according to your textbook, this is the big O notation definition, and you must by heart this and write it in your exam. Okay, so for you, just assume this is your big O. But what is really a big O? So the big O is something like this, right? So you only have you have only one constant. You don't have two constants. So let us say you are going to you have an algorithm that has a complexity of g of s. Okay, so g of s is the total time, the t of n we calculate, right? So that's the g of s. That will be like one big polynomial. Now, if you want to give a bound to it, then you find out one more polynomial f of s, and you multiply that by a constant. At some point that constant will always be, I mean the product, right, the c into f of s will always be above your g of s. Okay, so even now it is abstract. Now it will become clear. Okay, so if we have something like let us say n squared plus 1000. Okay, so we just leave it at that. If we have n squared plus 1000, or like actually let's why to bother a square, right? So we'll just take n. So n plus 1000, if that is your g of s, then my f of so this is a polynomial, right? So g of s is n plus 1000. F of s I can just consider n. Okay, and I will say the graph of your g of s is going to look like this, right? So initially it will be 1000, correct? And then it's going to linearly increase like this. So this is your graph for your g of s. Now my n is going to be like this, correct? So it's going to be at 45 degrees, correct? So but I don't want that, so I'll multiply that by a constant. Let us say at 0, what is my value? 1000, correct? Now let me multiply this by factor 1000, then my n will become, okay, at 0 it will be 0. Okay, and I can have some constant times n. So if it's like 1000 times n, I'm going to have something like this. So this is also linear. Okay, it can be something else also. I'm just picking some the same 1000 number. Till this point my n will be my this f of n, right? F of n will be below your g of s, but after some point it's always going to stay above. It really does not matter, it will never come down. Okay, so I have found one constant c. In this case I have picked 1000, and and from that I also proved that my f of n will always be above your g of n here. Okay, this is f of n. Okay, so now I have found one constant, so I can say that this algorithm is bound by O of n, because I have found one constant that is always above this. Okay, so that's the idea. Why we are going through all these things, algorithms in architecture course, we will see. Okay, we will. It's very important. All right. Any questions on this? So this is very important, guys. Next, we have P versus NP. This is also very important. Okay, so I think we would have skipped this module in algorithms course for whatever reason, right? P versus NP. P is polynomial algorithm. So if you take any algorithm, so that algorithm should, if you can find a polynomial solution to it, like the number of steps it takes to finish a particular answer. Say for example, if you take the directory, right? So searching in a directory, it's linear. Okay, it's just number of pages in directory is what your worst case time is, correct? So many algorithms like your sorting, searching, all these have a polynomial time bound, but there are algorithms which do not have polynomial time. For example, solving sudoku or your chess, right? So these algorithms don't have actually a polynomial bound. Okay, so these there are lots of other algorithms too. I mean, a lot of other problems too that are like that. So these algorithms, so for some, we don't even know whether there is a polynomial bound or not. Okay, so these algorithms are called non-deterministic. Okay, non-deterministic polynomial. Okay, so these are the algorithms that fall under that non-deterministic polynomial category. Okay, I'll not go much deeper into it. So there's a big question, one of the $1 million questions, really a $1 million question. If you can answer this, you'll get $1 million. Okay, so whether P is not equal to NP or P equals to NP. Okay, so this is a widely open. It's an open problem and one of the top open problems in the world. So why it's by widely believed that P is not equal to NP, and we've been doing all these things now because we are not able to prove otherwise. So if that is the case, then your algorithms that have polynomial solution will be here, and so there are other algorithms where currently what the best algorithms that we know are still in the exponential time bound. Okay, so these fall under the NP, and there are even further problems that are NP complete. These are very hard problems. So we'll not go into those things now. Okay, so we're almost done. So we'll just find out your knowledge, like refresher of your algorithms, right? Specify whether the following complexity belong to polynomial or non-polynomial. I just want you guys to quickly answer this. Okay, O of n, polynomial or non-polynomial? Actually, when I say non-polynomial, it means an exponential time bomb. Okay, quick, come on. Non-polynomial. No, wrong. So this is polynomial, right? What's a polynomial? Polynomial is something like this, right? Y equals to a1x plus a2x squared plus something something. Correct? If I can form some equation like this, then so this will come under polynomial. Okay. So if you take this alone as a polynomial, what's the complexity of this? So this will still come under O of x squared, correct? So this is still a polynomial. Okay. All right. So now let's do this again. O of n cubed, polynomial, non-polynomial, polynomial. Good. Next, O of n log n, n log n, polynomial. Correct. O of 2 power n, polynomial. No, wrong. Okay. So this is not polynomial. This is non-polynomial. This is exponential. Okay. When you have n as an exponent, it doesn't become a polynomial. Okay. So this is an exponential equation or time bound. Okay. So specify the big O for the following polynomials. Okay. So now you have 100n plus 25n squared plus 5n cube. So which of the big O's will this fit? N cube. Correct. Can I also say this particular equation has big O of n power 4? Actually, I can, right? So this will still fall under big O of n power 4 or big O of n power 5. Okay, because I can always my big O of n power 5 will always be above this equation. Okay, in the graph, correct? So, but then we will always go for a tighter bound. So whichever is the tightest bound, we will go to that. Log n plus n, n log n. Can you try again? So when you have this plus, right, so you always take the worst of these two. In this case also you took the worst, isn't it? N squared n cube. So you were easily able to say it belonged to O of n cube. Similarly, between these two, whichever is the worst, you have to pick that. Okay, which is the worst of these two? N. So this belongs to O of n. Okay, you always pick the worst. Okay, next one. 2 power n plus n squared. 2 power n. Very good. Okay, you pick the worst of these two. Good. Good. N squared 2 power n. N squared 2 power n. So this doesn't have a plus, right? It actually has a product. So it means you have to consider both. So the complexity is n squared 2 power n. Okay, so the third option here. All right. Okay. So with that, we are done for the day. Okay. You have a good weekend. I'll see you next week. Hope you guys understood something and had a good refresher. Okay. All right. Thank you guys. You can just put your attendance here, mark your attendance, give your USN, and we are done. Thank you.